All right, in this section of the video bootcamp series, we're going to be covering the basics of line of sight and how it works in the system. Now, make sure you look at your terrain effects chart on your player aid card, and it lists down the obstacle height for all the different hexes and whatever game module that you're playing. Make sure you check that out to find out what level the terrain goes to, whether it's level 1, 2, 3, or 4. And you're always going to start level 0 on your base ground level. So like right along here where our roads and empty terrain is, that's level 0. The trees will go up to level 1. Low, small buildings go up to level 1, and then the hills will go up to 2, 3, 4, however high they go. And if you have a, for example, level 1 tree on top of a level 1 hill, that's going to go up to level 2. So make sure you add things like that together as you're going to figure out where your line of sights are. Now, there is a black square in the center of every hex, and when you're tracing your line of sight, you're going to trace square to square. You're going to trace the dot from each hex, okay? So you see, you'll just take and trace it for whatever, and that's going to figure out where your line of sight is coming from when you're figuring that out. Now, there are different types of terrain. You've got blocking and degrading terrain. Blocking terrain is obviously just going to block line of sight, and degrading will obviously degrade it, and degrading will cause a -1 modifier on your direct fire table when you're attacking. Now, this is per hex, not per piece of degrading terrain. We have some bushes up here, then they are considered degrading terrain. And if there is a wreck, for example, in that hex as well, wrecks are also considered degrading terrain. This would not apply a -2 modifier. It would still just be the -1 because it's still just being traced through a single hex. Now, when you're figuring out whether or not it's blocking or degrading, you have to make sure that the different levels that they're on, that you're accounting for that. So in this example here, let's pretend that these two buildings are multi-story buildings. They're single hex buildings. Normally they would just be one, but for our purposes, we're going to pretend they're two. And these squads, the American squad is on the upper level, the German squad is on the upper level, and there is a degrading terrain in between them that goes up to level 1. Well, considering these guys are now effectively on top of level 1, they're on level 2, they have a clear line of sight to each other. They're effectively looking over that terrain at each other. Now, blocking terrain does cast a 1 hex shadow. However, so what I mean by that is, pretend for our purposes that this level 1 hill is clear. There's no trees on it. This German squad wants to fire on this American squad. They can't, because the building here casts a 1 hex shadow blocking line of sight away from it. Okay, so they cannot see them, and that shadow is going to increase the farther away the attacker is from the defending unit. So if our American squad were backed up a hex and our German squad were backed up a hex, again, pretend these trees are not here and they were trying to chase their line of sight, they couldn't, because you add in the amount of hexes in between the German squad and the American and the blocking terrain. So the 1 hex shadow would now become a 2 hex shadow, and so on. You can continue to add that up. It is a little different when it comes to hills. Let's take and put our guys here. The German squad is on a level 2 hill, looking down at an American squad on level 0 ground. This is effectively a staircase, so this is considered an open line of sight. They would have nothing blocking them from seeing each other. Now, if the hill is on the same level, it changes that up a little bit. So if we put our German squad here, the hill is all at level 1 along this line of hexes, and for however many hexes there are in between the attacker and the drop-off is how many hexes of a shadow it's going to cast a blocking line of sight. So our drop-off is 1 hex away from our attacker. That means that the drop-off is going to go 1 hex. So these American squad here would effectively be in a 1 hex shadow, and that would extend on. So if we backed our German squad up 1 hex, then the shadow would extend another hex as well. Now you can trace your line of sight in between different hex sides, okay? So we've got our firing line here. We'll trace it out right here. You can see that they're tracing their line of sight right along the hex side, okay? Now, if it is open on one side or blocking the grain on the other, it's going to be considered open. So this would be an open shot, even though there's blocking terrain on the other hex. Now, that changes if it's got smoke in one of the hexes. That effectively is going to block it. Now, if it was blocking and degrading terrain, obviously the shot's going to be degraded. So if we took our smoke off and traced our line of sight through, this would be a degraded shot instead. Now that changes up a little bit when we're tracing our hex side along a wall. So let's take and pull our guys over here. We can see that their line of fire is right here along this hedge. Okay, so hedges, walls are the same difference for our purposes. So this would be considered an open line of sight. They would have nothing blocking it. But if the German squad were pushed up here, now we would be tracing our line of sight across the wall in the hex side. So this would be blocked instead. Now keep in mind that walls, hedges, things of that nature, they're going to have an open line of sight to the hexes that they form a hex side with. Now there is a new rule when it comes to buildings and firing in between them in version 5.0. Normally you would not be able to fire between these, but now actually you can. So our American squad or German squad, and they're wanting to fire at each other, and they actually can in between these two buildings here. They will have an actual line of sight to each other. Now that shot is going to have a modifier though. It's going to be a -2 on the direct fire table or a +2 on the ordnance to hit table when they're firing at each other. Now this is still considered blocking. They can't take and move through in between the buildings to get to each other. They'd still have to go through the building or around it to get to each other, but they can fire in between the buildings, and this would be allowed now.